The clock on the wall struck exactly 9 a.m. at the Jefferson County Courthouse. The air was thick with tension, suffocating the room, which was packed to the brim. Eyes were fixed on the main entrance, each person harboring their own thoughts and judgments about the special hearing that day. This was a custody battle, a battle that, to outsiders, seemed already decided. At the far end of the room, Jasmine Carter stepped in with swift, purposeful strides. She was a 34-year-old black woman, an emergency room nurse at St. Joseph's Hospital, having just finished a grueling 12-hour shift. Her light blue nurse scrubs, once pristine, were now stained with blood that hadn't fully dried. Her worn-out sneakers were dusted with dirt, and her shoelaces were barely tied. Her hair was hastily tied up in a simple bun, her eyes tired yet filled with resolve. She knew today wouldn't be easy, but she never imagined she would show up at court in this condition. As soon as she entered, Jasmine felt the weight of the judgmental gazes surrounding her. Strangers whispered, some furrowed their brows, while others cast quick, dismissive glances. On the opposite side, Ryan Maxwell, Jasmine's ex-husband, sat confidently in an impeccably tailored suit, his posture exuding arrogance. The wealthy white man who once vowed to protect her now stood as her adversary in the most brutal battle of her life, fighting for custody of their 2 children, whom Jasmine considered her very lifeblood. Jasmine moved to her seat next to her lawyer, Matt Anderson, who was looking at her with a mix of concern and encouragement. As she sat down, he leaned in close, quietly asking, "Jasmine, are you okay?" She gave a slight nod, her gaze falling to her hands. They still bore the red indentations from repeatedly handling needles and bandages. Some bloodstains remained on her scrubs, cold against her fatigued skin. But Jasmine didn't care. She knew she couldn't change the fact that she had saved a life just hours before. A precious life. A 7-year-old white boy whose parents had embraced her, tearfully thanking her in desperation. In that fleeting moment, Jasmine wondered if she would receive any compassion from the judge. But before she could even hope, she locked eyes with Judge Eleanor Mitchell, known for her ruthless severity. A white woman in her 60s, her carefully styled silver hair, gold-rimmed glasses, and wrinkle-free judge's robe all radiated authority. Judge Mitchell assessed Jasmine from head to toe, her discomfort clear on her face. Clearing her throat, Judge Mitchell's cold voice broke the silence that had descended over the room. "Ms. Carter, this is a courtroom, not an emergency room. Do you think it's acceptable to appear here looking like that?" Whispers quickly spread across the room, eyes filled with skepticism and ridicule focused on Jasmine. At that moment, Jasmine understood that this battle was not just about custody. It was also a battle against the deep-seated prejudices of race and class. She had long been familiar with such condescending looks throughout her life, but never did she think she would face them in a place that was supposed to represent justice. Taking a deep breath, Jasmine lifted her head, her gaze unwavering as she looked directly at the powerful woman sitting high above her. She was ready to face it all, even the harsh, bitter realities of this society. The whispers in the courtroom had yet to die down when Judge Eleanor Mitchell's cold, piercing gaze fixed firmly on Jasmine Carter. Jasmine could clearly feel the discomfort, even disgust, in every gesture, every line on the face of this powerful woman. Eleanor Mitchell was infamous for her strictness in the Jefferson County legal community. A white woman in her 60s, always dressed in perfectly pressed attire, every strand of silver hair neatly coiffed, her high heels polished to perfection, and she would accept nothing less than precision and decorum in her courtroom. This was not the first time Judge Mitchell had displayed her displeasure toward someone, but today her anger seemed deeper and more venomous. When she saw Jasmine enter the courtroom in her blood-stained nurse's scrubs, tired and hastily moving, her discomfort shifted to outright disdain. In her eyes, Jasmine was not just irresponsible, she represented the type of person Mitchell had always sought to avoid in both her life and profession. "Miss Carter," her icy voice rang out again, sharper and more distinct this time, instantly silencing the entire room. "I think you need to understand that this is an official court of Jefferson County, not a break room at the hospital. The outfit you're wearing is not acceptable in this courtroom, especially when this trial will decide the future of your own children. Or do you think that just because you were rushing to save someone out there, you're entitled to disrespect everyone here?" Her words struck like sharp daggers, coldly piercing Jasmine's heart. In that moment, Jasmine fought to steady her breath, her gaze unwavering, but her heart felt as though it were being crushed in her chest. A few people in the courtroom exchanged glances, and whispers began anew, their curious and judgmental stares lingering on her. Before Jasmine could respond, her lawyer, Matt Anderson, quickly stood up. His face was tense, but he managed to maintain his composure. "Your Honor, I believe the unique circumstances of Miss Carter's situation today warrant fair consideration. She just came off a shift in the emergency room, where she saved a child's life just hours before arriving here. She did not intend to disrespect anyone." "I didn't ask for your opinion, Mr. Anderson," Judge Mitchell sharply interrupted, her eyes never leaving Jasmine. "Miss Carter is an adult, and I believe she understands the consequences of her thoughtless actions." With that, Mitchell slightly leaned forward, her eyes cold with deeper disdain, her voice lowering but becoming even more menacing. "This trial is not for people who are irresponsible and lack the basic awareness of courtroom attire, like you. Perhaps you should take some time to reflect on whether you truly deserve to be a mother to these two children before you try to prove to others how busy you are. I've seen too many cases like this, people using their jobs as an excuse to mask their own irresponsibility." Her words sank heavily into the atmosphere, thickening the tension in the room. Jasmine felt her body freeze, each word from the powerful judge causing more pain than all the discrimination and contempt she had faced in her life combined. But these words, from the very person who held the power to decide her children's future, left a wound deeper and more bitter than anything she had ever experienced. Across from her, Ryan Maxwell, Jasmine's ex-husband, sat with a self-satisfied expression, his lips curling into a faint, smug smile. The slick, wealthy white man sat calmly, watching the proceedings with an indifferent, cold gaze. Ryan knew exactly the advantages he had in this trial: his status, his wealth, his connections, and, most crucially, the prejudiced gaze of the judge directed at Jasmine. For Ryan, Judge Mitchell's cruel remarks were like an unexpected gift, and he didn't even need to speak to turn Jasmine into the loser in everyone's eyes. In that moment, Jasmine felt a powerful surge of anger rising inside her. She took a deep breath, telling herself she could not cry, that she could not let those words shatter her spirit or her faith in the truth. She had nothing to be ashamed of. Her blood-stained scrubs were a symbol of her responsibility, courage, and sacrifice, qualities she carried in her heart every day. But whether she could make the people in this courtroom understand that was an entirely different story. In the thick air of judgment and doubt, Jasmine felt more alone than ever. She glanced over at Matt Anderson, who returned her look with sympathy, but a sense of helplessness. Both of them understood that this battle was not just about custody. It was a fight against the deeply ingrained racial prejudices that had existed in society for far too long. Prejudices now being subtly masked by the prestigious cloak of the powerful woman sitting above them. Jasmine gently lifted her head, her gaze resolutely fixed on Eleanor Mitchell, silently telling herself that no matter how difficult it became, she would not allow anyone to diminish her dignity and dedication any longer. She knew that she was not just fighting for herself, but for the children waiting for her at home, waiting for their mother to return and hold them tight, despite the storm brewing outside. In that suffocating, tension-filled atmosphere, Jasmine could clearly feel the cold gaze of Judge Eleanor Mitchell, as though she were trying to drown her in a puddle of shame. But in the very moment when everyone expected Jasmine to lower her head, her shoulders stood even straighter, her head held higher than ever. A powerful inner strength surged within her, a strength forged from sleepless nights, tense emergency shifts, and silent prayers before each life-or-death decision at the hospital. Jasmine took a deep breath, her eyes sharp and full of pride as she met the icy stare of Eleanor Mitchell. Her voice rang out strong and clear, each word heavy as lead but full of dignity and determination. "Judge Mitchell, you call this pajamas, but did you know that on these pajamas is the blood of a 7-year-old white boy I just saved a few hours ago? Yes, it's true. I didn't have time to change clothes, because in that moment I had to choose between saving a life or losing a few more minutes to put on something that would satisfy you." Jasmine's words struck like thunder, cutting through the murmurs and whispers that had been rising. The room fell into complete silence, all eyes turning toward her with a mix of astonishment and admiration. Even Judge Mitchell, known for her control over her emotions, couldn't hide the shock in her eyes. In that moment, it felt as though the world outside this courtroom had stopped spinning. Jasmine stood there, unwavering, unshaken by the power and prejudice that had been so clearly displayed before her. Jasmine knew that her words had the potential to completely shift the dynamics of this trial, but she also knew deeply that this was not just a fight for custody, but a fight to reclaim her dignity, her self-respect, and her voice in a world rife with injustice. Across the table, Ryan Maxwell raised an eyebrow, the smug smile on his face freezing for the first time. He hadn't expected Jasmine, the woman he had once viewed as weak and familiar, to stand so strong. The realization hit him hard, and he instinctively clenched his jaw, his eyes flickering with a mix of confusion and anger. To Ryan, Jasmine had always been the dependent, weak wife, someone incapable of standing on her own. But what she had just shown was a blow to his pride, making him feel deeply threatened. On Jasmine's side, Matt Anderson lowered his glasses slightly, his expression one of surprise, but also satisfaction and admiration. He had always known Jasmine was a strong woman, but he had never witnessed her strength so clearly and powerfully before. Matt wasn't just watching a client defend herself. He was seeing Jasmine as a symbol of dignity and courage, qualities he rarely saw in this cold courtroom. The silence lingered, thick and heavy, as Eleanor Mitchell slowly took a deep breath, struggling to contain the emotions rising within her. Her lips pressed tightly together, her once cold gaze now filled with doubt, unable to believe what she had just heard. To her, Jasmine was just another ordinary black woman, someone easy to disregard, easily subdued by her harsh words. But the truth laid bare before her left. Eleanor stunned, realizing she had underestimated Jasmine far too much. Eleanor Mitchell, who valued appearance and discipline above all, had been raised in a wealthy family, groomed in the upper echelons of society. She was taught to believe in rigid social norms, that people like Jasmine had no place in her world. Her proud, arrogant beliefs had built an invisible wall between her and people like Jasmine. And today, Jasmine was the first to dare challenge that invisible wall openly, in front of everyone. In the seemingly endless silence, Eleanor's gaze drifted to her own trembling hands. She clenched them tightly. How long had it been since she felt this uneasy? She had always prided herself on her control, but now she was struggling to maintain her composure. Jasmine's retort had shaken the very foundation of her belief that power and status could defeat all logic and emotion. After what felt like an eternity, Eleanor regained some of her composure. She cleared her throat, attempting to sound as cold and detached as usual. "Ms. Carter, I appreciate your dedication to your work. However, that is no excuse for you to disrespect the decorum of this courtroom. I hope you will reflect on your actions and words, so they do not further impact the court's final decision." Though her words were still stiff, it was clear to everyone that the confidence once present in her voice had diminished significantly. She was trying to appear composed, but her eyes couldn't completely mask the inner turmoil she was experiencing. Jasmine, standing amidst this emotional storm, maintained her calm and strength. She didn't lower her head, didn't back down, because she knew that what she had just said was not just for her, it was for all the black women who had been looked down upon and oppressed out there. And in that moment of silence, full of emotion, Jasmine understood that this was only the beginning of a long battle ahead, but it was also the moment she had regained the most important thing, her dignity and self-respect. As Judge Eleanor Mitchell tried to regain control of the situation after Jasmine's strong retort, at the far end of the crowded courtroom, a young woman quietly lowered her phone. Her name was Emily Harper, a 23-year-old law student who had only been interning at the Jefferson County Courthouse for a few weeks. With blonde hair, fair skin, and a sweet face that concealed a sharp mind, Emily wasn't new to tense trials like this, but today she witnessed something truly different, an unforgettable moment that deeply moved her heart. From the moment Jasmine walked into the courtroom in her blood-stained nurse's scrubs, Emily could feel something was off in the way people were looking at her. But it was Judge Mitchell's cruel attitude and Jasmine's resilient response that prompted Emily to discreetly raise her phone and record the entire event. Glancing quickly around to make sure no one noticed, Emily nervously opened the familiar TikTok app and pressed the upload button. She didn't hesitate to give the video a short yet powerful title that expressed her outrage. Black nurse discriminated against by judge for wearing blood-stained scrubs after saving a 7-year-old boy's life. She immediately added hashtags she knew would spread like wildfire, igniting a call for justice. # Justice for Jasmine. # Scrubs are uniforms. # Stop racial bias. Once the video was uploaded, Emily slipped her phone back into her jacket pocket, her heart racing faster than usual. She silently hoped that the video would gain attention, at least to ensure that what had happened in that courtroom couldn't be ignored. But she had no idea that just minutes later, the brief clip would become the spark for a massive movement far beyond her expectations. While the courtroom continued its tense deliberations, outside, Emily's short video was quickly spreading far beyond the confines of Jefferson County. Within minutes, the clip had thousands of views and hundreds of shares. Online users expressed their outrage, passionately sharing the message, and it was spreading rapidly. Before long, in offices, cafes, and living rooms across the country, the video of Jasmine was being passed around at lightning speed. People voiced their disgust at the racial bias Judge Eleanor Mitchell had inadvertently exposed through her words and attitude. Thousands of angry comments flooded under the video. Shameful that a justice system still holds these biases in 2025. How can a nurse who just saved a child's life be treated this way? Her scrubs are a uniform for saving lives, not pajamas. Meanwhile, the hashtags #Justice for Jasmine and #Scrubs are uniforms shot up the trending charts on Twitter and Instagram at an astonishing pace. National media outlets quickly took notice, and major news organizations like CNN and MSNBC aired the clip, raising questions about Judge Mitchell's fairness and professional ethics. Legal and human rights experts began appearing on news segments, engaging in serious discussions about the persistent racial discrimination in the American judicial system. While the world outside was erupting in response to the incident, Jasmine had no idea that she had become the center of a massive debate. She stood firm, her gaze resolute, ready to face whatever challenge lay ahead. But across from her, Ryan Maxwell and his lawyer Richard Bennett began to realize that this case was spiraling far beyond their expectations. Ryan furrowed his brow, the confident expression on his face fading. He now understood that Jasmine was no longer the easily overwhelmed woman he had once known, and that she was now receiving unprecedented support from outside. Lawyer Bennett quickly whispered something in Ryan's ear, and both men's expressions grew even more serious. They realized they were facing not just a personal dispute, but a public storm that could destroy their careers and reputations if they didn't handle it carefully. Back at the judge's seat, Eleanor Mitchell seemed to sense that the atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted. The looks around her had become different, more skeptical, less friendly. She could never have imagined that just a few dismissive words from her would escalate things so quickly. An undeniable sense of unease began to well up inside her, a feeling she had never experienced in her career, which had always been protected by the power and respect others had for her. Outside the courtroom, Emily Harper moved through the increasingly crowded hallway. People were beginning to hold up their phones, each one seemingly searching for a way to capture the unfolding events of the trial. Emily looked around, a strange feeling rising within her, part pride, part worry, as she realized that her small act today could change Jasmine's fate, and even more, change how people viewed justice in the judicial system. In that brief moment, Emily knew she had done the right thing. She had helped shatter the silence, forcing society to confront the injustices that had long been hidden beneath the prestigious cloak of a biased system. And no matter how the trial concluded, from that moment on, Jasmine Carter's story would no longer be just a personal one. It would become the shared story of millions of people across the country, people who were watching and ready to stand up for true justice. Even before the trial in Jefferson County Court had concluded, a growing crowd had already started gathering outside. The sound of murmurs and chatter filled the air, forming a vibrant background noise that reflected the heat of the story that had just spread across social media. Within just a few hours, the video secretly recorded and shared by Emily Harper had quickly surpassed 5 million views. Powerful hashtags like #Justice for Jasmine and #Scrubs Our Uniforms flooded major social media platforms, drawing deep attention from both the public and national media. Not only did social media explode, but major media outlets also quickly took action, turning the story of Jasmine Carter into the focal point of public attention across the country. Top news channels like CNN, MSNBC, and ABC News swiftly broadcast live from in front of the courthouse, updating the public with the latest developments on the case. Experienced reporters continuously sought witnesses, interviewed local residents, and raised sensitive questions about the injustices within the local judicial system. Within less than an hour, television network trucks filled the area outside the courthouse. Flashing lights from cameras and reporters with microphones and handheld cameras crowded together, trying to reach anyone directly or indirectly involved in the trial. Local residents, hearing the breaking news, immediately flooded downtown, increasing in number as they gathered. In a matter of moments, the area outside the Jefferson County Courthouse had turned into a sea of people, buzzing with energy. Amidst the crowd, many held up handmade signs showing absolute support for Jasmine Carter. "We stand with Jasmine." "Saving lives is not a crime." "Stop racial discrimination now." The atmosphere was filled with both outrage and hope, a strong belief that justice would triumph over prejudice and injustice. Not only black people but also white people, Asians, and Latinos all stood together in this unprecedented show of solidarity. There were elderly people with white hair shaking as they held up their signs, schoolchildren still in their uniforms, and even nurses and doctors from nearby hospitals wearing the same scrubs as Jasmine, expressing deep empathy. Some nurses in the crowd were seen crying when interviewed live on television. A young nurse, eyes red and choked with emotion, spoke into CNN's camera. "Every day we wear these scrubs to save lives, never thinking that one day it would be used as an excuse to belittle us. Jasmine represents all of us who silently sacrifice every day." Just minutes later, the image of this young woman became an emotional symbol on social media, further strengthening the wave of support for Jasmine. Inside the courtroom, those involved in the trial began to feel the enormous pressure from the public outside. The noise from outside became increasingly noticeable, forcing security personnel to work hard to maintain order. Judge Eleanor Mitchell, known for her cold and authoritative demeanor, was no longer as composed as usual. She struggled to focus on the papers in front of her, occasionally glancing out the window, where the chants from the crowd still rang out, reminding her of the consequences of her earlier thoughtless words. For the first time in years, Eleanor Mitchell became acutely aware of the pressure from public opinion. The powerful judge, who once believed she could remain unmoved by external waves, now felt deeply confused and uneasy. Doubts began to creep into her mind about the very values she had always upheld, and the way she had taken it upon herself to easily judge others. Jasmine's strong reply continued to echo in her mind, and now that voice was amplified by the millions calling for justice outside. Meanwhile, Ryan Maxwell and his lawyer Richard Bennett sat across from each other, both in a state of extreme tension. Ryan repeatedly ran his hand through his sleek hair, his chin trembling slightly with worry. He had never expected this lawsuit to escalate into a national event, threatening not just his personal reputation but his entire family's. Lawyer Bennett furrowed his brow, casting a disapproving look at Ryan. He had never liked high-profile cases that brought such negative publicity. Bennett knew that, win or lose, his reputation would be seriously damaged by the public pressure. In a small corner of the courtroom, Jasmine sat quietly, listening to the chaos outside with a heart full of emotion and gratitude. She had never expected such overwhelming support from society, but the truth was that she had now become the symbol of a much larger struggle than just her own. Jasmine felt as though she were drawing strength from millions of strangers, people standing with her, demanding justice and equality. Emily Harper, the young woman who had filmed the original clip, was now standing in the crowd outside the courthouse, looking around with a mixture of shock and emotion. Emily knew that she had played a part in creating this pivotal moment, but what amazed her most was the extraordinary power that the community had shown by standing up together to protect such a brave woman like Jasmine. Emily smiled faintly, her eyes filled with hope. No matter how the trial ended, one thing was certain. This society would no longer easily turn a blind eye to injustice and prejudice. Jasmine Carter's story was no longer just a lawsuit. It had become a powerful statement, awakening a sense of responsibility and unity in every person. Inside the courtroom, the tension grew as the pressure from the outside public intensified. The powerful, firm chants of the crowd outside the courthouse echoed clearly, reminding everyone present that this trial was no longer just a personal battle between Jasmine Carter and her ex-husband, Ryan Maxwell. It had transformed into a symbol of a much larger struggle, a fight against the deep-seated prejudice and injustice that persisted in society. Richard Bennett, the lawyer representing Ryan Maxwell, glanced around the courtroom, his palms slightly sweating as he realized the immense pressure from public opinion had made the situation harder to control than ever before. Richard Bennett was a middle-aged white man, renowned throughout the city for his sharp litigation skills and his cold, decisive demeanor, which at times bordered on ruthless. Hired at a hefty fee, his sole goal was always to win at any cost. But today, he faced a completely different situation. A trial where every word was being scrutinized by millions of people watching closely. Bennett stood up from his seat, carefully adjusting his expensive shirt collar, then slowly made his way toward the witness stand, his cold gaze fixed firmly on Jasmine as a silent warning. He knew he had to change tactics, turning Jasmine from a sympathetic figure in the eyes of the public into a cold, irresponsible mother, one who neglected her own children. His voice, soft yet dripping with sarcasm, created a sharp contrast to the tense atmosphere enveloping the courtroom. "Miss Carter, I believe we've all heard quite a bit about your dedication to saving lives. It's truly commendable." Bennett paused slightly, tilting his head with a knowing look. "But I wonder, have you ever considered that saving strangers might cause you to neglect your own flesh and blood?" Bennett's question hit like a sharp arrow, aimed directly at a perceived weakness that he believed Jasmine couldn't easily defend against. His cold stare seemed to challenge her, forcing her to confront the guilt that every mother dreads. Ryan Maxwell, seated not far away, allowed a slight smug smile to play at the corner of his lips. He understood Bennett's ultimate goal: push Jasmine into a defensive position, force her to reveal her emotional weaknesses in front of everyone. Ryan had always seen Jasmine as a woman dedicated to her work, sometimes to the detriment of her own well-being, and today that very commitment would be exploited against her. But Jasmine did not falter under Bennett's calculated pressure. She stared directly at him, her eyes alight with the strength of a woman who had endured countless trials and hardships. When she began to speak, her voice was not just calm but resolute, carrying deep conviction. "Mr. Bennett, I have not forgotten my children. In fact, every time I walk into that hospital and save a life, the only thing on my mind is the image of my own children. I save someone else's child because I want to be the kind of mother I hope will be there if my own children were in danger. You may call it neglect, but to me, it's love. It's responsibility as a mother." Jasmine took a deep breath, her voice growing even stronger as she sent a clear message to everyone in the courtroom. "It's this very job that has fed my children since their father walked away. It's this very job that has allowed me to stand on my own 2 feet and protect my children from the cold selfishness they've had to endure. If what I'm doing is wrong, then show me how many mothers out there are wrong just like I am." Her powerful and emotional words instantly silenced the entire courtroom. Everyone seemed to be drawn into the force of her emotions, and even Richard Bennett couldn't help but feel unsettled by her incredible resilience. He had expected Jasmine to crumble under his sharp question, but the reality was the complete opposite. He had misjudged the inner strength of this woman. Bennett instinctively glanced at Ryan Maxwell, whose expression had now become serious, his initial confidence fading. Ryan began to clearly feel that his obstinance was facing an enormous obstacle, a barrier built from Jasmine's dignity and unwavering motherhood and the immense support from the public outside. Outside, the chants and support of Jasmine rang out once again, louder than ever, as if everyone was collectively agreeing with what she had just said. In that moment, both Bennett and Ryan realized they were losing control of this trial, not just because of Jasmine's powerful argument, but also due to the massive support from millions who were rising up against the injustice. Judge Eleanor Mitchell, seated high above, quietly observed the developments, her face becoming increasingly tense. Bennett's biased words had now backfired, turning against him and Ryan in the eyes of the public. She realized that from this point on, Any ruling she made would be scrutinized and judged by millions of people. And in the deep silence that enveloped the courtroom, Jasmine knew she had just passed a significant test. But she also understood very clearly that her fight was far from over. The atmosphere in the courtroom remained deeply tense after Jasmine's powerful and emotional rebuttal, when the large door behind suddenly swung open, attracting the attention of everyone present. The sound of quick, decisive footsteps echoed through the silence, making its way straight toward the witness stand. A woman entered with confidence and composure, wearing the familiar white doctor's blouse carefully draped over a professional office outfit. It was Dr. Maria Gonzalez, the chief emergency room physician at St. Joseph's Hospital, a woman in her 50s, known for her exceptional skill and deep compassion. As soon as Jasmine recognized the person entering, her eyes widened in surprise mixed with emotion. She had never imagined that her boss, always busy with hundreds of patients like Dr. Gonzalez, would be willing to drop everything to come here, in the midst of this tense trial, to defend her honor. Their eyes met for a brief yet meaningful moment. It was a look filled with empathy, trust, and the silent encouragement Jasmine needed at that moment. Dr. Gonzalez approached the witness stand, stood tall, and looked directly at Judge Eleanor Mitchell with a serious but composed expression. When asked to introduce herself, she spoke clearly and concisely in her deep, warm voice, unshaken by the attention focused on her. I am Dr. Maria Gonzalez, the chief emergency room physician at St. Joseph's Hospital, where Ms. Jasmine Carter has worked for over 8 years. Matt Anderson, Jasmine's attorney, quickly stood up and made his way toward Dr. Gonzalez, gently asking, Dr. Gonzalez, could you please share with the court the nature of Ms. Carter's work and the reason she arrived here today wearing scrubs stained with blood? Dr. Gonzalez didn't hesitate, her eyes lighting up with clear pride as she spoke about Jasmine. I can tell you that Jasmine Carter is one of the most dedicated and responsible nurses I have ever known in my 25 years of practice. This morning, at around 4 a.m., a 7-year-old boy was brought in with severe injuries from a car accident, in critical condition. Jasmine was the one who directly participated in the emergency treatment, working alongside me and our medical team for over 2 hours to save the boy's life. Her voice caught slightly with emotion as she continued, her eyes glistening with tears but maintaining the necessary strength. Yes, it's true she didn't have time to change, but I ask you, if you had to choose between saving a child's life and changing into a clean outfit, what would you choose? Jasmine chose to save a life, and I am sure that was the most noble choice. Dr. Gonzalez's heartfelt words left the courtroom in complete silence, creating a deep, emotional stillness. Richard Bennett stood across from her, his brow furrowed as he realized the situation was turning increasingly unfavorable. He glanced at Ryan Maxwell, whose face showed confusion and disappointment, clearly signaling a loss of the initial confidence he had once had. Dr. Gonzalez turned back to look directly at Judge Mitchell, her voice now more serious than ever. But the saddest thing I see in this trial is not that Jasmine had to rush here in blood-stained scrubs, but the way she has been treated and judged by those who should be protecting justice and equality. I've worked with Jasmine long enough to know that she has to work twice, even 3 times as hard as others, just to be recognized as a normal person, simply because she is a black woman. And today, once again, she faces the contempt and prejudice that should not exist in this courtroom, a place that represents justice. Dr. Gonzalez's sharp but incredibly honest words rang like a wake-up call for everyone in the courtroom. Many people bowed their heads silently, questioning the biases, intentional or accidental, they had harbored. Some even began to feel ashamed for having silently agreed with the unfair criticisms from Judge Mitchell and Lawyer Bennett earlier. At this moment, Eleanor Mitchell could no longer hide the increasing discomfort on her face. She had never anticipated that this trial would take such a complex and disadvantageous turn. The criticism from Dr. Gonzalez, a highly respected figure in society, had forced her to seriously reconsider her actions and attitude. The usual confidence Eleanor had once exuded was now beginning to crack, replaced by an unsettling feeling of doubt about the values she had always trusted. Outside the courtroom, as Dr. Gonzalez's emotional testimony was quickly picked up by reporters and broadcasted live, the crowd outside once again raised their voices in powerful support of Jasmine. The chants rang out, louder and more determined than ever, as if affirming that public opinion had completely sided with Jasmine and was ready to stand against any injustice she faced. In that moment, Jasmine felt a powerful wave of warmth rising in her chest. Dr. Gonzalez's testimony not only gave her more strength to continue this fight, but also helped her believe in a future where people were judged by their qualities and sacrifices, not by their skin color or outdated societal prejudices. Jasmine understood that this struggle would not end with today's trial. It was just the beginning. The silence in the courtroom was thick with emotion after Dr. Maria Gonzalez's powerful testimony, like a tolling bell striking deep into the minds of everyone present. Jasmine stood there, her chest filled with emotions she could hardly put into words. Even Judge Eleanor Mitchell, who had always maintained an air of cold authority, could no longer hide the clear disturbance in her eyes and expression. Attorney Matt Anderson gently moved toward the judge's bench, his voice low and full of emotion. "Your Honor, I would like to submit one more piece of evidence, a letter I just received right before this trial began. This is a letter from the parents of the 7-year-old boy whom Ms. Jasmine Carter saved this morning. I believe this letter will help us better understand the true character of the woman standing before you today." Anderson slowly unfolded the hastily written letter on a simple piece of paper, his hands trembling slightly as he began to read aloud, each word clear but filled with emotion. "Dear Court, we are the parents of the 7-year-old boy who was rushed to St. Joseph's Hospital this morning in critical condition after a serious car accident. Our hearts nearly stopped when we were told our son might not survive. At that most desperate moment, it was Miss Jasmine Carter who stood by us, tirelessly fighting to save our son's life. She didn't just fulfill her duty as a nurse, she did so with all the love and compassion a person could give. When we learned that Miss Jasmine had to leave the hospital right after saving our son's life to come to this court to fight for the custody of her own children, our hearts broke into pieces. As parents, we cannot fathom how such a wonderful mother could endure such great injustice. We humbly ask this court to listen to our heartfelt plea. Jasmine saved our son's life. That mother deserves to keep her children. Thank you for your time and consideration. David and Sarah Thompson." The moment the last words left Anderson's mouth, a profound silence fell over the courtroom, heavy yet full of emotion. Everyone seemed to stop breathing for a moment, trying to absorb the deep meaning behind the words of this stranger couple. Many in the courtroom began to feel the sting of tears, which quietly rolled down their faces, tears of empathy, compassion, and even shame for the biases they had either unknowingly or willfully carried with them. Even Richard Bennett, the usually cold and ruthless lawyer, instinctively lowered his head, avoiding the tearful gazes of those around him. He clearly felt that every word in the letter was a direct condemnation aimed at the strategy he had employed, those prejudiced remarks and questions, attempting to turn Jasmine from a devoted mother into an irresponsible woman who neglected her family. Ryan Maxwell, sitting beside him, now appeared pale, his usual arrogance completely gone. He sat quietly, his hands clenched in helplessness, the feeling of deep shame unfamiliar and overwhelming. On the high bench, Eleanor Mitchell slowly removed her glasses, discreetly wiping away a tear from the corner of her eye. She had never expected to be so moved in a courtroom. The simple, yet heartfelt words from the parents of the boy who had narrowly escaped death forced her to face a harsh truth. She too had inadvertently allowed bias and contempt to influence her judgment of Jasmine. The pride and coldness Eleanor usually carried with her were now completely dissolved, replaced by a deep sense of self-reflection. Jasmine stood still, listening to every word in the letter as though she were hearing her own heart being spoken in the courtroom. Tears quietly welled in her eyes, but these were not tears of weakness or disappointment. They were tears of gratitude, an understanding that she was not alone in this fight. Jasmine knew that no matter how this trial ended, she had already won in some way, because now she knew that many people had seen and understood her true worth: a mother, a devoted nurse, and above all, a person deserving of respect. Outside the courtroom, as the contents of the letter were quickly relayed by the media, the crowd erupted in even greater emotional chants, louder than ever before. Strangers collectively clapped, embraced one another, and wiped away tears of emotion. The power of unity and compassion now transcended all boundaries, creating a massive wave of support that spread throughout every corner. And in that deeply emotional moment, Jasmine felt a fierce, unwavering belief rise within her that true justice, in the end, would triumph over all prejudice and injustice. Because in the eyes of those around her now, Jasmine realized they no longer saw her by her skin color, her attire, or any other bias. They saw her for who she truly was: a deserving mother, a quiet hero of this life. As the reading of the letter concluded, a profound silence fell over the courtroom, so deep that one could almost hear the breath of every person in the room. All eyes turned toward the high bench where Judge Eleanor Mitchell sat. This was a rare and pivotal moment in her career, when the powerful and cold woman suddenly felt that the absolute control she had always prided herself on was slipping away. Eleanor slowly put her pen down, her hands trembling slightly as her gaze remained fixed on the letter in Matt Anderson's hands, her expression one of clear astonishment. Throughout her more than 30 years on the bench, she had faced countless tense situations, made difficult decisions, but never had she confronted such a heart-wrenching truth. A truth that forced her to confront the deep-seated biases within herself for the first time. Mitchell looked over at Jasmine, the young black woman she had harshly criticized just moments ago for wearing blood-stained work scrubs. In that moment, she felt as though an invisible weight had settled upon her shoulders, and all the cruel words and condescending glances she had directed at Jasmine became painfully clear. Eleanor felt as if a cold mirror had been held up to her soul, forcing her to recognize that beneath the imposing robe of a judge, she had allowed racial prejudice and class bias to influence her judgments. A deep sense of discomfort and guilt, something she had never felt before, rose within her. Eleanor Mitchell realized she had been too harsh, too rigid, and especially too biased in judging Jasmine. She looked down at the notes in front of her, the cold, biting words she had spoken to Jasmine now dancing mockingly before her eyes, ridiculing her for her own insensitivity and narrow-mindedness. How long had it been, she wondered, since she had judged people based on their skin color, clothing, and appearance rather than their true nature and inner truth? In that moment, everyone in the courtroom could feel the profound change taking place within Judge Eleanor Mitchell. Her expression, once firm and unyielding, was now filled with confusion, regret, and a touch of shame she could not conceal. She took a deep breath, trying to regain her composure, but her voice still trembled slightly as she spoke. "Before we continue with this trial, "I would like to make a special request," Mitchell said slowly, her gaze for the first time showing softness and sincerity never seen before. "I ask that the court reporter immediately remove from the record all the disrespectful and unfair remarks I made about Ms. Jasmine Carter today." The room was filled with murmurs of disbelief, as the audience could hardly believe their ears. A judge as renowned for her strictness as Eleanor Mitchell had just disavowed her own judgments, something that had never happened before. Mitchell looked directly at Jasmine, and this time her gaze was not cold or dismissive but filled with remorse and sincerity. Her voice was low, quieter, but very clear. "I want to offer my most sincere apology to Ms. Carter. I was too harsh, too unfair, and biased when I judged you based solely on your appearance and my unconscious prejudices. Today, you have taught me a valuable lesson, that a person's dedication and compassion can never be judged by their clothes or the color of their skin. I am deeply ashamed for letting these biases influence the proceedings of this trial." Judge Mitchell's words of apology spread through the courtroom like a gentle yet powerful wave, touching everyone in the room deeply. Jasmine felt her throat tighten, her eyes glistening with emotional tears. This was the first time in her life she had witnessed someone in such a prestigious position publicly admit their mistakes in front of so many people. Across from her, Attorney Richard Bennett and Ryan Maxwell sat in absolute silence. Ryan lowered his gaze, unwilling to lift his head, overwhelmed by a deep sense of helplessness and shame. Bennett, the sharp and cold lawyer he had been just moments ago, now sighed gently. He understood that, after Mitchell's unexpected confession, every strategy he had employed so far had become worthless, because now everyone in the courtroom could clearly see what true justice looked like. Outside the courthouse, as news of Judge Mitchell's official apology to Jasmine was quickly broadcast, the crowd erupted in loud cheers and applause. The sound was thunderous, filled with joy, triumph, and the belief that justice was finally being served. Emily Harper stood among the crowd, tears streaming down her face, feeling the immense power of unity and true love for justice. In that moment, Jasmine stood at the heart of the courtroom, feeling with clarity that this was not just her victory, but the victory of millions outside, struggling daily against invisible biases. Her eyes scanned the faces in the courtroom, her heart filled with the unwavering belief that justice and compassion would always triumph over prejudice and injustice. As long as each person had the courage to reflect on themselves, just as Judge Mitchell had done today. In the emotionally charged moment when Judge Mitchell's heartfelt apology left the courtroom in stunned silence, all eyes instinctively turned toward Attorney Richard Bennett and Ryan Maxwell, awaiting their next reaction. The atmosphere became unnervingly quiet, creating an invisible pressure that weighed heavily on the two men who had once confidently stood on the side of power and wealth. Bennett stood motionless, his expression completely altered from the arrogance and coldness he had initially displayed. In the sharp eyes of this seasoned attorney now lingered a deep sense of doubt, a doubt about the very things he had once believed in and fought to protect. Bennett glanced down at the notes he had carefully prepared for his final arguments. Each page, filled with sharp arguments and tactical, pointed questions, now suddenly seemed meaningless, like hollow words that held no value against the undeniable strength of the truth that had just been laid bare. Judge Mitchell's confession was a harsh wake-up call, forcing him to look inward and reassess his role in this trial. He glanced at Ryan Maxwell sitting beside him, whose once proud eyes were now darkened with disappointment and helplessness. Ryan didn't dare to look up, his hands clenched tightly, trembling slightly. For the first time in his life, he was forced to confront the reality that money and power could not shield him from the truth and justice. Bennett could clearly sense the failure in Ryan's eyes and gestures, and for the first time in his career, he felt deep shame for having participated in causing more pain to a woman who had endured so much injustice. Looking toward Jasmine, Bennett saw her standing there, still strong and dignified despite the deeply emotional moments she had just gone through. The image of the nurse in blood-stained scrubs, symbolizing dedication, responsibility, and motherhood, stirred an undeniable feeling of remorse within him. Bennett took a deep breath, silently questioning whether any victory would truly be worthwhile if it were built upon injustice and bias. Slowly, he stood up, feeling as though his legs were heavy with the weight of his decision. He scanned the room, where all eyes were on him, filled with surprise and curiosity. His voice rose slowly, this time devoid of confidence, replaced instead with sincerity and clarity more than ever before. Your Honor, before we continue this trial, I would like to say a few words. I voluntarily withdraw my final argument and offer my deepest apologies for allowing prejudice and flawed tactics to influence my approach to this case. Bennett's words hit the courtroom like a thunderclap, leaving everyone stunned. A lawyer, renowned for his firmness and coldness in the courtroom, had just publicly admitted his mistake and willingly stepped back, something no one had ever expected. Whispers of astonishment filled the room, but Bennett didn't stop there. He continued in a clear, powerful voice. As a lawyer, I've always been taught that my job is to protect the interests of my client. But today, I realize that doesn't mean I have the right to disregard everything, including justice and truth. I deliberately exploited societal biases in an attempt to weaken Ms. Carter's image, and I sincerely apologize for that. Jasmine Carter has shown us all that the true value of a person can never be judged by their appearance, race, or social class. As Bennett finished speaking, the room fell into complete silence, a profound stillness enveloping the space. Jasmine felt her throat tighten, unable to believe what she had just heard. She looked at Bennett, and his eyes were completely different now, sincere, filled with regret and deep remorse. She understood that, though late, he had truly awakened to the undeniable truth. Ryan Maxwell, sitting beside him, could hardly contain his emotions. The anger and disappointment made him tremble, but there was nothing he could do anymore. He had lost in the very battle he thought would be easily won with money and power. Outside the courtroom, as news of Attorney Bennett's public apology and voluntary withdrawal of his final argument spread, the crowd erupted in overwhelming applause and cheers. The sound was deafening, filled with joy, triumph, and the belief that justice had finally been served. Ordinary citizens, those who had long trusted in justice but had been repeatedly disappointed, could now believe once again, because they had witnessed a special moment when someone representing power and social bias had bowed to the truth and human dignity. On the high bench, Judge Mitchell silently observed the entire event, her heart filled with emotion. She understood that this was an incredibly important moment, not just for Jasmine Carter, but for the entire judicial system she represented. A system that, from this moment forward, needed to change, to be fairer, more humane, and free of the invisible biases that had existed for far too long. In that moment, Jasmine stood in the courtroom, silently wiping the tear that rolled down her cheek. She knew she was not alone in this fight, and finally, justice had spoken. Not through the power of wealth or authority, but through the power of truth and compassion. As Attorney Bennett's unexpected voluntary withdrawal concluded, the courtroom was still submerged in a profound silence, filled with both astonishment and emotion. Every person present was acutely aware that they had just witnessed an extraordinary moment, one where justice, truth, and compassion had clearly defeated power, prejudice, and wealth. All eyes turned toward Judge Eleanor Mitchell, waiting for her final decision after the emotional developments that had unfolded. Judge Mitchell took a deep breath, her hand resting on the judgment table, still slightly trembling. After so many years on the bench, she had never experienced a trial that impacted her heart so profoundly as this one. Jasmine's sincere and powerful words, "Doctor." Gonzalez's emotional testimony, the heartfelt letter from the family of the boy Jasmine saved, and even Bennett's confession of guilt. These events had forced her to deeply reassess herself and the justice she had sworn to uphold. She slowly stood up, her voice calm but full of authority, clear and stronger than ever before. After carefully considering all the evidence, testimony, and especially the events that have transpired today in this courtroom, I have come to my final decision. Everyone instinctively held their breath, their eyes fixed entirely on the powerful woman on the high bench. Jasmine, too, stood still, her heart racing so fast that she could hear the beats in her chest. For Jasmine, this wasn't just a routine custody battle. It was a fight to protect her dignity, honor, and the sacred right to motherhood. Judge Mitchell directed her gaze straight at Jasmine, her expression now devoid of the usual coldness and rigidity, replaced by warmth, empathy, and deep sincerity. "Ms. Jasmine Carter, I hereby declare, without a doubt, that after everything we have witnessed today, no one in this courtroom can deny the sacrifice, courage, and noble qualities you possess. I made a grave mistake in underestimating you, and I sincerely take full responsibility for my own bias and prejudice." She paused for a moment, took another deep breath, before delivering the most significant judgment in Jasmine's life. "I have decided to grant full custody of the 2 children to Ms. Jasmine Carter. I have absolute trust that you are a wonderful mother, a strong woman, and the brightest example of compassion and dedication that I have witnessed throughout my career." As the announcement echoed through the room, the courtroom erupted in a wave of applause and emotional cheers. The crowd, comprising citizens, healthcare colleagues, and even court staff, rose to their feet, tears of happiness streaming down their faces. It was a moment filled with emotion when justice truly triumphed. Not through power or wealth, but through the strength of truth, courage, and human dignity. In the front row, attorney Matt Anderson clapped loudly, his eyes filled with pride as he looked at Jasmine. Across the room, Attorney Bennett bowed his head slightly, not in bitter defeat, but as a genuine gesture of respect for the extraordinary woman who had stood up against all prejudice and injustice. Ryan Maxwell, who had once believed that wealth and status would ensure his victory, sat still and motionless, completely stunned. He realized, for the first time in his life, that power and wealth had been completely defeated by the dignity and strength of true motherhood. Jasmine stood there, tears gently flowing down her cheeks, feeling an overwhelming sense of relief and deep happiness. She had fought long and hard for this moment, and at last, all the pain, pressure, and suffering she had endured had been worth it. She wiped away the tears, smiling a soft but radiant smile, the most beautiful smile she had ever had. In that moment, she knew that this victory was not just hers. It was a victory for all the women out there still fighting to be recognized, respected, and protected. Outside the courthouse, when the news of the historic ruling was quickly broadcast, the crowd gathered before the courthouse erupted in deafening cheers and joy. They embraced, crying in happiness, feeling deeply that justice was no longer just an abstract concept. It truly existed, ready to protect those who dared to stand up for it. In that moment, Jasmine looked up at the sky through the courtroom window, silently offering her most heartfelt thanks from the bottom of her heart. She understood that this was a pivotal moment, one that would not only change her life forever, but would also mark a historic turning point in the fight against prejudice and social injustice. And she was deeply grateful to have had the strength to see this battle through to the end. Shortly after the historic ruling was announced, the emotional atmosphere from the Jefferson County courtroom quickly spread outside, creating a wave of emotional shock throughout the nation. In just a few minutes, the news of Jasmine Carter, the strong black nurse who stood up against injustice and racial prejudice, winning her custody battle, was broadcast live by major media outlets like CNN, MSNBC, and ABC. Bold headlines flashed across TV screens, and online articles were continuously updated with the most moving and powerful content, all focusing on Jasmine with deep admiration and empathy. Black nurse defeats prejudice, Jasmine Carter becomes a symbol of justice, a trial that changed history when dignity triumphed over power and racism. Within less than 24 hours, Jasmine Carter's name became a national symbol of the fight against prejudice and racial discrimination, a living testament to the power of compassion, justice, and human dignity. On major social media platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, the hashtag number Justice for Jasmine spread faster than ever, accompanied by millions of posts, images, and videos from ordinary citizens across America, expressing their support and honoring Jasmine. In the days that followed, Jasmine's story became more than just breaking news. It turned into a powerful call for American society to seriously reconsider the invisible biases that had existed for too long, causing deep harm to millions. On national television, civil rights activists, legal experts, and influential figures continually discussed and analyzed the case, transforming Jasmine from an ordinary woman into a shining symbol of fairness and courage. But the story didn't just stop with media coverage. Jasmine Carter's story sparked an unprecedented wave of real-world action. Hospitals across the nation, from New York to California, from Chicago to Texas, organized a special day like never before. Scrubs Appreciation Day, to honor nurses, doctors, and medical staff who silently sacrifice every day to save lives. On this day, all healthcare workers wore their familiar scrubs, similar to the ones Jasmine wore in that emotional courtroom. The simple attire, once dismissed by Judge Mitchell in her moment of prejudice, had now become a powerful symbol of dignity, dedication, and the boundless love that healthcare workers consistently offer their patients. Images of emotional scenes flooded social media. Young nurses, experienced doctors, and older healthcare workers, all proudly wearing their scrubs and holding up signs like, "Scrubs are not pajamas, they are the uniform of compassion." We stand with Jasmine Carter. St. Joseph's Hospital, where Jasmine worked, became the epicenter of this grand event. Thousands of local residents gathered outside the hospital, holding fresh flowers and handmade signs filled with heartfelt messages, all wanting to express their deepest gratitude to Jasmine and all the medical staff there. Amid the crowd, Dr. Maria Gonzalez spoke emotionally, her voice choked but filled with pride. Today, we are not just honoring Jasmine Carter. We are honoring the dignity and dedication of all those who have chosen the medical profession, those who have embarked on the arduous, self-sacrificial path of saving lives. Jasmine has awakened all of us, reminding us that justice and love are always stronger than any prejudice or injustice. Back inside his office, attorney Richard Bennett sat deep in thought, the images of the scrub-wearing event on television causing him to reflect more deeply on his own life. He wondered if, throughout his career pursuing victory and money, he had ever truly fought for the right values. This event had not only been a professional failure, but also a profound lesson on professional ethics, compassion, and social responsibility that he would never forget. Ryan Maxwell, in a dark corner of his luxurious mansion, turned on the TV to watch the images unfold, feeling bitter and empty. He realized that what had just happened wasn't just a personal failure. It was the most painful awakening of his life, realizing that money and power could not always conceal the true nature of a person. Meanwhile, Jasmine remained as she always was, humble and simple, amid all the honors and praise. On the special day when all of America wore scrubs for her, Jasmine continued her shift at the hospital, caring for patients as she always did. When asked by her colleagues how it felt to become a societal icon, Jasmine smiled softly and replied gently but sincerely, "I never thought I would become a symbol of anything. I just do the work I love, try to be the best mother I can be, and stand up whenever I see injustice. If my story helps someone out there find the courage to speak up and fight for the truth, then I know that everything I've gone through has been worth it." And in that moment, as the whole nation honored and supported her, Jasmine understood clearly that this story was no longer just hers. It had become the shared story of all those who have always believed that fairness, dignity, and compassion will always be stronger than any prejudice or injustice in society. The wave of impact created by Jasmine Carter's story did not stop at protests or emotional social media posts. In a very short time after the historic trial, the influence of Jasmine's courageous actions spread far beyond the usual media coverage, becoming an inseparable part of the public consciousness across the United States. And it was at that very moment that an unexpected proposal was sent to Jasmine from a place she never imagined, the American Labor and Service Museum. Located in the heart of Washington, D.C., the American Labor and Service Museum is home to some of the most valuable artifacts documenting the important milestones in the struggle for justice and equality in this country. The museum's management decided to reach out directly to Jasmine, requesting that she consider donating her famous blood-stained scrubs, the ones she wore during her historic custody trial, to be permanently displayed alongside historically significant artifacts such as Rosa Parks's shoes, the fireman's helmet from the 9/11 attacks, and protest banners from the civil rights movement of the 1960s. At first, Jasmine was truly taken aback by this proposal. She had never thought that her simple, blood-stained scrubs would be seen as a symbol of such immense historical significance. To Jasmine, those scrubs were just part of her daily work, the uniform she wore while saving lives and witnessing life and death every day. She had never imagined they would represent anything larger than that. Jasmine was a humble person, always trying to avoid the media spotlight. Becoming a symbol, even with the nation's praise, made her feel uncomfortable and even reluctant. But after careful thought, and with gentle yet sincere encouragement from her colleagues and close friends, especially from Dr. Maria Gonzalez, whom Jasmine respected deeply as a mentor and older sister, Jasmine decided to accept the proposal. Dr. Gonzalez had told her earnestly, "You're not just doing this for yourself, Jasmine. You're doing this for the millions out there, those who are silently fighting every day against prejudice and injustice. These scrubs are a living testament to show them that when they stand up for what is right, history will never forget them." With this heartfelt encouragement, Jasmine carefully packed her blood-stained scrubs. Her hands trembled slightly, and her heart felt a deep, indescribable emotion as she prepared to part with the scrubs that had been with her through the most significant moment of her life. When she handed them over to the museum's representative, Jasmine spoke gently, in her most sincere tone. "I never wanted to be a symbol. I just want to show up when it matters, to do what's right when others need me the most." These humble yet powerful words quickly spread, further increasing the admiration people had for Jasmine. In just 1 week after her scrubs were displayed, the American Labor and Service Museum saw an unprecedented spike in visitors, with thousands of people coming from all over the country to see the now national symbol in person. The room where Jasmine's scrubs were displayed was always crowded, with many of the visitors being nurses, doctors, and healthcare workers. People who understood better than anyone the sacrifices and biases they still face every day. Visitors often stood silently, reading the inscription next to the display, Jasmine Carter's Blood-Stained Scrubs, a symbol of dedication, dignity, and strength in the face of societal prejudice. It was here, in the historic custody trial, that Jasmine used the truth and her dignity to overcome the most deeply entrenched biases in society. Even those who had previously been skeptical or held unconscious biases about Jasmine began to realize they had been wrong. Attorney Richard Bennett, on a special visit to the museum that weekend, stood in front of the scrubs for a long time, his heart heavy with complex emotions. Staring at the bloodstains and dirt still visible on the scrubs, he clearly understood how wrong he had been in underestimating and dismissing Jasmine during the trial. Bennett left the museum with an odd sense of relief that he had finally understood and accepted the deepest lesson of his career. Ryan Maxwell also visited the museum once, but he stood from a distance, looking at the scrubs with a bitter, defeated gaze. He realized that he had lost everything, not because of a lack of money or power, but because he hadn't understood that the true value of a person isn't measured by superficial things, but by what is inside their heart and their actions. Meanwhile, Jasmine continued with her everyday work at St. Joseph's Hospital, dedicated to caring for her patients and raising her two beloved children. Occasionally, she received heartfelt letters from all over, expressing gratitude and admiration. But for Jasmine, none of this changed her. She remained humble, quiet, and as normal as she had always been. One late afternoon, as she sat with her children in their small living room, watching a special program on justice and civil rights, her daughter turned to her with curious eyes and asked, "Mom, why do people want to see the clothes you wore?" Jasmine gently embraced her daughter, smiling warmly and replying, "Because sometimes the simplest things in life are the ones that speak the most about who we are. Those clothes remind everyone that when it matters, anyone can stand up, do what's right, and make a difference." And Jasmine knew that whether she wanted it or not, her scrubs had truly become a permanent symbol, a reminder to everyone of the power of justice, compassion, and the courage to rise above societal prejudice. As soon as the historically significant scrubs of Jasmine Carter were prominently displayed at the American Labor and Service Museum, her story became a profound source of inspiration that spread widely across the country. However, Jasmine's impact did not stop at protests or emotional newspaper articles. What she accomplished went far beyond that. Within just a few short weeks after the trial, a deep wave of change began to form, even surpassing what Jasmine could have ever imagined. In Washington, D.C., Jasmine's story reached the most powerful corridors of government, touching the hearts of senior lawmakers who could truly create widespread change. Inspired by Jasmine's resilience and compassion, a bipartisan group of legislators quickly began drafting a new resolution named the Carter Standard, a law designed to protect the rights and dignity of all healthcare workers nationwide who are forced to appear in court following a grueling shift. This resolution not only aimed to ensure that healthcare workers would never again be discriminated against or unjustly judged based on their work uniforms, but it also directly and powerfully condemned all forms of racial discrimination, especially in the judicial system. The clearest provision of the Carter Standard states that no healthcare worker should ever endure a degradation of dignity or be negatively judged simply because they appear in court in scrubs or post-shift attire. Another crucial part of the resolution declared that any biased behavior, speech, or attitude from judges or lawyers is a serious violation of professional ethics, warranting specific and severe disciplinary actions. Shortly after it was presented to Congress, the Carter Standard received overwhelming support from legislators across all political parties, a rare occurrence in American legislative history. No legislator wanted to be left out of this critical moment, as it was an opportunity for them to clearly demonstrate their stance in the fight against the deep-seated injustices and biases that have long existed. During an official session of Congress on a beautiful morning, the Carter Standard was swiftly and solemnly passed with unanimous support. Those who spoke in Congress that day emphasized a shared message. We passed this resolution not only for Jasmine Carter, but for the millions of healthcare workers across the nation, those who continue to sacrifice every day to save lives and protect public health. We have a duty to protect their dignity, devotion, and noble sacrifice from all disdain and prejudice. When news of the passage of the Carter Standard spread through national media, millions of people across the country immediately celebrated with joy and deep pride. On social media, the hashtag number CARTERSTANDARD quickly became a global trend, accompanied by personal stories, experiences, and heartfelt thanks from healthcare workers, lawyers, activists, and ordinary citizens. In courts across the United States, an unprecedented wave of change also began to take place. After the Carter Standard was enacted, hundreds of judges, those who had unintentionally or deliberately allowed biases to influence their decisions in the past, publicly apologized in the media, sincerely acknowledging their mistakes. This was a historic move never seen before, profoundly shaking the American judiciary and creating a domino effect that sparked sweeping changes in the way the judicial system operated nationwide. One of the most notable judges to publicly apologize was Eleanor Mitchell. On national television, Judge Mitchell openly shared her greatest career mistake. "I once thought that a judge like me was never influenced by bias, but Jasmine Carter's trial showed me a sad and profound reality. None of us are completely immune to our unconscious prejudices. I am grateful that Jasmine had the courage to stand up and help me realize that justice can only exist when we are truly fair and view people with our hearts, not through eyes clouded by prejudice." Even Richard Bennett, the lawyer who had represented Ryan Maxwell, publicly supported the resolution on television, stating that he viewed the Carter Standard as an important step not only for society, but also for the professional ethics of those in the legal profession. Meanwhile, at St. Joseph Hospital, Jasmine remained humble and modest amid all the historic events surrounding her. But she could not hide the tears of emotion as she witnessed the moment the Carter Standard was passed. For Jasmine, this was not just a personal victory. It was a beacon of hope for millions of others, those who had long silently endured injustice without being able to speak out. One weekend evening, as Jasmine sat quietly with her two beloved children in their small home, her daughter gently whispered, "Mom, now everyone knows who you are. How do you feel?" Jasmine smiled softly, stroked her daughter's hair, and spoke with the most loving and sincere voice. "I don't need them to remember who I am, my love. I just hope they will always remember the most important lesson. No one deserves to be judged based on their appearance, clothing, or race. And more importantly, each of us can change the world with our own kindness and the courage to stand up when necessary." And Jasmine understood that the resolution bearing her name, the Carter Standard, had truly exceeded everything she had ever hoped for. It was no longer just her story. It had become an integral part of history, a timeless reminder that justice, love, and dignity will always triumph over prejudice and injustice as long as we are brave enough to stand up and protect those values. In the days following the passage of the Carter Standard Resolution, its impact continued to resonate throughout the nation. A silent yet extraordinary journey that Jasmine Carter had undertaken still reverberating deeply in the heart of America. No longer just headlines on newspapers or breaking news on television, but an emotion that seeped slowly into evening conversations between parents and children, into hospital meetings, into citizenship ethics lessons in schools, and into the inner thoughts of those who once believed prejudice was something that could never be changed. Then, as a meaningful conclusion to the first chapter of her journey, the City Council of Jasmine's hometown, a small but proud town called Northbridge, located in southern Maryland, held a special closed meeting. After unanimous agreement, they reached a historic decision to declare April 14th every year as Jasmine Carter Day. This day was not only to honor a woman who had courageously stood up for justice, but also to deeply instill the values she represented: silent bravery, resilience in the face of prejudice, responsibility to the community, and above all, the spirit of never abandoning what is right, even when it leads to misunderstanding, isolation, or harm. The announcement was made at the town's central square, where the townspeople had once walked past Jasmine without noticing her. Now they gathered in a crowd, their eyes full of admiration and gratitude. There was no loud parade, no fireworks, or glamorous stage, just old neighbors, colleagues, students, teachers, and even strangers, standing together in respectful silence, holding white candles, bowing their heads as the mayor read her name aloud on a bronze plaque. Jasmine Carter Day, honoring the power of compassion, dignity, and justice. Jasmine stood quietly in the back corner, in a simple coat, silently observing the crowd. She didn't step forward to speak, didn't wave or shed tears. It wasn't because she wasn't moved, but because the overwhelming emotion made her want to fully experience that moment, silently and sincerely, just as she had always lived. That evening, after the ceremony, Jasmine placed the congratulatory cards and handwritten letters from people into the dining table. Her 2 children were waiting in the living room, her eldest daughter, Maya, still with shining eyes from the ceremony. The young girl sat close to her, resting her head on her mother's shoulder, and quietly asked, "Mom, when I grow up, will people still remember who you are?" The question echoed softly, but with a weight that struck Jasmine's heart. She looked at her daughter, her gaze filled with warmth and the strength of someone who had weathered storms and still stood tall. Her hand gently squeezed Maya's hand, and she responded tenderly, "They may not remember my name, or my face, or what I said, but they will remember that there was someone who didn't run away, even when everything was against her. They'll remember that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes strength is the calm presence in the hardest of times." Maya fell silent, her eyes lighting up as if something had been planted in her young heart. Jasmine knew in that moment that a new generation was being shaped. A generation that would learn to see people not by their skin color, clothes, or social status, but by their actions, sacrifices, and inner dignity. After that day, Jasmine Carter Day was celebrated annually in various states, gradually becoming a cultural symbol. In schools, teachers used Jasmine's story to teach about justice, human rights, and how one person can change an entire system with courage and honesty. Many healthcare organizations adopted this day as a tradition to honor frontline workers. And in those courtrooms where unjust reproach once echoed, a small bronze plaque now hung at the door, with a brief but weighty inscription: "Here, everyone is seen with dignity and listened to with fairness." The story of Jasmine Carter ended not with loud applause, but with a quiet resonance, like a melody that lingers, touching the hearts of millions. She didn't change the world with speeches, power, or banners. She changed the world simply by showing up, at the right time, in the right place, and never stepping back from what was right. And so, the message would live on. Not because Jasmine wanted to be remembered, but because she made it impossible for people to forget. Have you ever witnessed or experienced a moment like Jasmine's story? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story meaningful, please like, share the video, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more inspiring content like this.